Um, Welcome back, everyone. So before starting, I would like to introduce myself. And I think the best way I can do this is by a very short anecdote. It was also Brussels 1 year ago when I first heard of the work time reduction network. And at that time, I was very into attending events from ETUI, the European Trade Union Institute. And there I saw that there was this discussion on how to move towards a 4-day work week, and unions were going to participate. And it was the first time I heard about Margareta and Adrian. And I remember very well, there was this panel. It was what actions are trade unions taking in the fight for working time reduction in Europe, which was actually moderated by Agnieszka, who now is our speaker. But in that discussion, one of the elements was that unions were saying that at that moment, 1 year ago, where the war in Ukraine just started, inflation was really at the top of their minds. And they were saying like, yes, work time reduction is important, but maybe not now. So that was a huge topic of discussion because in that panel, among the panelists, Pedro Gomez was also present, and he was also trying to make a case. He's an economist who has been also writing a lot about the 4-day work week, and he was explaining why perhaps just fighting for wages could be a bit short-term perspective. So since then, the discussion has been ongoing, and we decided to take that theme in our first panel discussion. My name is José Luis Gallegos. I'm a PhD candidate at Erasmus University in the Netherlands, and I have the pleasure to moderate this first panel. As I was already introducing, one of our speakers is Agnieszka Piasna. She's a senior researcher at the European Trade Union Institute. She specializes on labor market policies and working conditions across Europe. So I would like to just make a very quick question, Agnieszka, if you had to go for one or the other, wages increases or working time reduction.
Sorry to say, both.
Both, okay. Now we have also she's connected right now, I think, Emma, right? She's connected already, Anke. So Anke Thorein, she's a trade union organizer in the collective bargaining department of the unit service of trade union Ver.di in Germany. So she provides support in developing collective bargaining policies, and she's particularly specialized on working time reduction. So Anke, if I could ask you, and if you are hearing us, please let us know that you are present in this room. What will be your quick first answer? Okay, that will be a pending answer. But in the meanwhile, we would like to ask the same question to our audience. So we have these QR codes that will pop up in the screen. Yes. So if you could please take off your phones and copy the QR code. That should direct you to a very short survey, just to also, have like the sense of the room. Where is their priority? Unfortunately, you don't have Agnieszka's answer, so you cannot say both. You have to say either or there is an undecided option. But of course, we understand that it is more complex than just one or the other. I'm also going to vote. It's not open. Okay. Adrian is helping us out. Yeah, it should be now open.
Okay.
Accept. Be honest with yourself, okay? Okay. So most of us have voted. We'll give 1 minute more. Maybe I hope the people online can also see the QR code. Yes. So please also feel free to vote. Can you just raise your hand if you have voted to see? Okay, most of us have voted. Yes, Adrian, I think we are ready to show the results. Oh, there is Anke. Okay, so 35% say wage increase, 48 reducing working hours, and there's 18% who are undecided. We'll make another poll at the end to see whether this has changed. So if let me take just a quick screenshot to see how things change. Perfect. So now that we have Anke with us, Anke, can you hear us? Yes. We cannot hear you. Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah. Perfect. So what will be your first immediate response?
I would like to have more money and more free time.
Very well. Well, with that first response, feel free to elaborate because the floor is yours.
I'm the first speaker, or?
Yes, that's correct. Oh, sorry. Yes, I'll just make the precision. With us, it was also Eva, who unfortunately she couldn't attend. She is collective bargaining officer in the Austrian Union GPA, but for health reasons, she couldn't make it. So we will start with you, Anke. So if you could elaborate on your response and tell us also a bit about the groundwork that you've been doing in terms of collective bargaining, that would really help us to start the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction of myself. I'm a trade union official in Ver.di, and I will give some overview about the theme of working time reduction with no loss in wages, for example. Depending on the industry, in sectors or company, we have a huge range of collective bargaining regulations with very different results and experiences. I divide them into 4 types for our purpose here today, so I think that's a little bit better for our understanding. I still have time. If I have still time, I will further report on special themes about part-time and also about the current collective bargaining demands in the public sector with regards to working hours. The first type of working time reduction, I would say, or call it as a normal reduction in working hours with no loss in wage. And there are 2 examples, both in the banking sector. For example, the collective agreement in the Sparda Bank, this is a cooperative bank, should be mentioned here. There is a 35 hours now with no loss in wages, and was achieved in 2 steps this or next year. Before, it was a 39 hours week, and this corresponds to a comparable pay increase of 11.4%. In addition, there was a one-off payment of 2,400 euros in January this year. So in fact, employees get more afterwards. The second example is the public banks. They achieved a reduction in working hours of 1 hour from 39 to 38 hours, and a salary increase of 5% and special payment of 1,000 euros, and it's covered 60,000 employees. For this year's round of negotiation for the public banks, which was just concluded last week on the 10th of October, salaries will increase further in 3 stages by a total of 11.5%. And it was agreed to enter into further collective bargaining with employers so that working hours can be made more modern and life-phase oriented with more influence for employees. It is perhaps for our purpose important to know that the employees were dissatisfied with the 1 hour reduction in working hours, and not because it was too little, but because it led to work intensification and only to more overtime. For this reason, the topic of working time organization has been put back on the collective bargaining agenda at this sector for the future. The second type of working time reduction, I would call it a reduction of working hours as a relief. Of course, also with no loss in wage. In the health and social sector, the reduction in working hours has been more closely linked to a relief. Here, there are quite a few cases for so-called relief days, for example, days off, if the staffing level is undercut. You know, perhaps you have you heard about it. With this, Ver.di has broken new ground in terms of collective bargaining policy. The challenges associated with this would have to be covered with an extra seminar. So there are some problems with to account all this, but yeah, anyway, this is a very good thing. In our sectors, we are dealing quite often with long working times, or especially working times arrangement. We have to know this. One special thing is the limitation of the maximum working hours in the rescue service. This is also about on-call duty. Ver.di was able to achieve the maximum working time of certain providers will be reduced from 44 hours, in some cases to 38.5 hours in 2 years, with the same salary increasing salary in wage rounds. The third type of working time reduction is the option working time model. We have collective agreements where employees can choose whether they want more money or more free time. A good example is the Deutsche Post. This is an example. Instead of a pay increase, working time reduction can be chosen, and next year other way around, and is also actively used. The same applies to Atuvia, which is an IT service provider. Here is the working time can be reduced relatively easily. The wage will be reduced accordingly for this time, but certain remuneration components such as the annual base budget or inflation compensation payment are paid out in full. That is very different to unlike the part-time model. So I would call type 4 as a reduction in working hours plus better working organization. At the regional area of the German Red Cross, which mainly takes care of senior citizens, a 4-day shift work was introduced. In the first step, working hours were reduced to 36 hours plus wage increase, but the goal is the 32 hours week in the future. It is an interesting here that employees want to continue to distribute their working hours within 5 days. This was accompanied by targeted changes in work organization and digitalization. The goal at the beginning was to increase efficiency, which should also be used for the benefit of employees. The increase in efficiency of about 10% was passed on to the employees in this form of working time reduction. So I have time more, or?
Yeah, Anke, actually, just if I could redirect some of the comments that you have made. You have specified different ways in which unions are negotiating for work time reduction, but as I understood, is it correct that some unions leave the decision to the workers to decide whether they want wage increases or working time reduction, but is it also the case that some unions are achieving both at the same time, or is it more in 1 year of negotiations the union fights one thing and in another year they fight a different thing, or is it achievable that both things are on the table of discussions simultaneously?
No, there's some different. Also, this is all only example from Ver.di, no, and also the option models. And normally, they choose one of these theoretical examples or types. It is very serious. I tried to divide the examples in models, and of course I will go further then, because now of course the Atruvia, for example, they have less working time hours, but furthermore they have the option to reduce further with loss in payment. So anyway, so
I guess the main insight we can take from you is there are different models in which
there are different
these
models,
two
of
items
course.
can be negotiated.
Yes, there are different models, and there are different collective bargainings, of course, and different branches and sectors. In the beginning, I said there are very different industries and sectors and companies, so you can't get through with one model. So there are some models, different models, and fit in the special files. So my conclusion would be, I can say a little bit about the public services, but my conclusion is that the reduction in working hours can only be introduced very well if the rationalization or increase in efficiency is only accompanied very good by a good change in the organization of work and a better working condition. If you don't have this, so you can't do this, the working time reduction. As I said in the first example, we have reduced the working time of 1 hour, but the working organization is not changed, haven't changed. So
Okay.
the employees were very dissatisfied, as it was not, it's good for them.
Perfect.
So that was my application.
Well, thank you very much, Anke. And Margarita, you're going to share some insights from Eva, right? Who couldn't be with us. Is that correct? We will have a round of questions, but if it's something to clarify, is it something to clarify or to elaborate? Okay, so maybe we can afterwards. Yeah, Margarita.
Yes, I just have to speak for Eva Scherz. She apologizes because she became ill, and she wanted to present the first model of the option between more money or more free time. This is an invention of the Austrian trade unions. She is from the GPA. This is the trade union for the white-collar people, and in cooperation with the ProG, this is almost for the blue-collar workers. And in the year 2012, they made the first time this collective agreement. Sorry, it's now only in German, but that means more time instead of more money for the electrical and electronical industry. And they made a collective agreement where you could choose to get the wage increasement or in money or in more free time. And you could also choose if you would have it in whole days or in shorter daily working hours or in some for the longer life course. And this option model, Anke told the same, her model 3 was this also. This became very popular in many different trade unions also, because it has, let's say, it has the plus that it allows to the people to follow their need for more free time. This is really growing in the last years, I suppose, as our little poll showed also. But it is not so hard for the trade unions to get it, because this is the negative point, it's completely paid by the employed people. You pay with your wage increase the free time. So, but anyway, for example, in Germany, the first trade union who implemented this model was our railway workers trade union, I think in 2015 around. And they were not sure if the members really would like it and made a poll then. And they were really surprised, because more than 60% really voted for more free time instead for more wage increase. And so with this model, I think we have, in some sense, not so optimal, but a very popular and practical solution for your first question.
Perfect. So we can say it's more democratic in the sense that union members are deciding, and yet the downside is that perhaps it brings us into this dilemma that you have to take one or the other, paying yourself for it, right? Okay, so now we go to Agnieszka, so that you can elaborate this position, Agnieszka, that you started telling us about both, having both options. Is that possible?
Yes, yes, that's my second answer. I will show you some, I will talk you through some of the results of the study we did that is described in the working paper that you can find on the table and online. But before I go into concrete example or the workings of working time reduction, let me just start with framing the question or framing the debate in a way that makes just really one answer possible or viable. So the starting point of my argument would be that the model of working time, which consists of 40, let's say, hours more or less across 5 days per week, is no longer fit for purpose, and is not fit for purpose for all actors involved in, broadly speaking, labor market or the economy. So very briefly, you know the arguments, but if we talk about the family well-being, there needs to be some adjustment made to account for the dual earner family, for the fact that women should be able to participate on equal footing in the labor market with men, which means that paid and unpaid work should be distributed more equally. There shouldn't be one person who carries the burden of one type of work and the other person in the household that carries the other burden, because then equality is very hard to be achieved. We know that 40 hours per week worked by every member of the household made it very difficult to fulfill any other tasks apart from paid employment, such as care, but also hobbies, just life really outside of work. So there is this argument, if you want to have the family model functioning in the way that we seem to want it to look in the Western society or in our part of the world, something needs to change in the model of working time. Of course, there are arguments linked to health. It's not it's not conducive to mental health, to physical health, to spend long hours in paid work. Long hours are also a sign of poor quality of work, poor job quality. And then we move to economic arguments. You also know them very well. Long working hours are not really economically efficient. They don't increase the marginal productivity in a way that justifies spending very long hours on the job. There are costs obviously associated with the health loss, absenteeism, turnover. So there is an economic, monetary bill attached to the long working hours. There's also an argument of the changing economy. We are no longer in the manufacturing or in industrial times when the norm that we talk about was elaborated, invented, and fought for. We are in the service economy, which has very different rationale for achieving productivity. So it's not any longer the use of very expensive equipment that justifies longer and longer working hours. So if anything, the current economy achieves efficiency by more flexible and longer operating hours. But please note that employers are not achieving longer hours with employing more full-time workers. What we see is fragmentation of the labor market, flexibilization of contracts, more and more part-time jobs being used to cover all spectrum of working time. So it seems that for the employers, the full-time norm also does not work very well. They opt for other solutions, but all those solutions have one common denominator, which is that workers pay, if not proportionately, I would even argue disproportionately, because typical contracts, part-time contracts, they come with a cost of the career penalty, insecurity, precariousness. So the bill is on the workers' side. Of course, there is also the social justice argument, whether we should strive to decrease inequality in the society and redistribute the productivity gains in a different way, that it doesn't go mostly to the capital owners or however you call the 1% or financialization of the economy that just accumulates the gains on one side of the labor market actors. So against this background, we can then reflect on how to formulate questions about working time reduction. How do we want to see it implemented? And wages are these questions. So do we want wage decreases at the expense of working time reduction? So what we ask in this panel really is not this or that. What we ask is whether so should workers pay for the need to adjust the working time norm, which is about 100 years old, let's say, to meet the challenges of today's society and economy? So that is the question I would like to to ask instead of just this or that. And that's why my answer was both. So it should be both working time reduction and both keeping up the wage increases as they have been. So this situation we researched in two big Italian companies in the manufacturing sector. Again, so this is the advertisement for the working paper, where exactly this situation was implemented. So there was a working time reduction negotiated with no loss in pay and even wage increases, because they were linked to the bonuses for atypical working hours, for certain types of shift work, and working time reduction was more was higher in terms of the hours reduced when the working time was more atypical. So the bonuses went together with working time reduction. But also the situation isn't that rosy or simple, because there were other trade-offs, as I said, and if I have time, I can just very briefly talk about them. But the case studies are interesting in the sense that this is different sector that many of the well-known trials that we have available from the knowledge-intensive services. Industrial setting is very different. Companies are large. The workforces are very complex, heterogeneous. Working time patterns are complex. This is mostly shift work that needs to be coordinated across various teams and departments. And working time is really a shift system. So then negotiation or changes in working time are much more complex and demanding task. In both companies, the working time reduction was introduced as the sort of productivity-driven change. So the rationale was that companies had a clear need. They wanted to produce more. And workers had a clear need that they want to work fewer hours. And that was, they met in between, but working time reduction is introduced to produce more. And that is the outcome as well, despite workers working fewer hours. So the objective was of the study was, first of all, understand how can you achieve, what steps lead to those agreements, how they can be negotiated, what are the technicalities, what's the policy behind that, what resources are needed, what challenges are faced by workers and unions in the negotiation process. So really just go step by step, ask unions and managers about the negotiation. And then the second question, outcomes. Does it work for workers? What works, what doesn't work? And just very briefly, the results I can summarize into sentences. So working time was integrated into the very complex shift system, which means there was no one-size-fits-all approach. In the factory, it was not possible to introduce the Friday off for everyone. It was a shift system that with each shift pattern, different working time reduction was introduced and different rotation of working time. And that also shows not only the complexity and fragmentation of working time in the current economy, that there is just not one model within the company, but also fragmentation of the workforce within one firm, because there were agency workers, temporary contracts, all of them worked on a very different pattern. So this very fragmented workforce and working time model had to be somehow brought together, renegotiated, reinvented to shorter hours. So the conclusion that we reach, that perhaps is most relevant to the question asked by José, is that bargaining on working time reduction alone, at least in the settings we studied, is not possible. It's much more complex, and any sustainable and equitable change in working time requires a more comprehensive negotiation. So that includes work organization, working time arrangements, allocation of tasks, allocation of teams, size of teams, ergonomic factors. There were many issues that entered the negotiation table. And here I circle back to the costs. So I said there were no costs on the side of workers in terms of wages. They even increased their take-home pay. But the costs materialized in a different way. There were certain trade-offs in the negotiation that they conceded to achieve wage and working time reduction, such as more variable hours, more unsocial hours of work in this arrangement, less individual control over working time, which is a very important factor. So the fact that they had much less say in choosing which shifts they work, and they could request only post hoc changes. The productivity underpinning of the whole process. So the working class to produce more, it showed its limits. So our conclusions are a critique of that approach. We acknowledge that was the premise on the part of the management to enter negotiations, but we clearly see that it didn't work that well. So working time reduction was seen as labor cost by the employer, and the shifts that were more favorable for workers in terms of working time reduction and wage advantage, they were treated as burdensome labor cost that was used only in extreme moments of high productivity demand, unpredictable demand from clients, because these are did I mention that was automotive industry. So the flow of demand is also not steady. And then that introduced another layer of unpredictability in working time, because it wasn't just the shift that it's very complex and very non-standard, but also people were changed between shift system in response to production needs. So you couldn't count on having working time reduction as a sustainable or constant feature of your work organization. So yeah, I'm not sure if I have still a bit of time. There's maybe one or two other conclusions I could just highlight, but I can leave it for later.
As a clarifying question, what the case that you are describing here, the work time reduction policy was introduced and pushed forward by the employer, right? Or was it the initiative of the union?
Working time reduction was the initiative of the union.
Okay.
The company had a clear need in both cases. We want to produce more, and we want to meet unpredictable demand of the market that's changing. And the two companies are also interested in a way that's interesting. They are complementing each other. One has just negotiated the working time reduction for the first time. So we look at the process of negotiation, and the implementation will only happen now. The other company has about 30 years of experience of negotiating and renegotiating different working time reduction patterns in different economic climate, because that goes through all the dot-com bubble, which wasn't really automotive bubble, but then 2007 recession, cost of living crisis, the shift to the electromobility, which impacts the automotive sector. So we follow the negotiation and renegotiation in various climate, but working time reduction was always workers' need. The company wanted to produce more, but unions were strong enough to then bargain something for it, not just concede to longer hours, worse shifts, and more flexibility in working time. So there was this constant the constant station. It was really the classic contested terrain in the relationship between employer and workers.
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to highlight what were the conditions that allowed for the negotiation of both in the same collective. I suppose this is in the collective labor agreement, right? So you mentioned the strength of the union, the compatibility with the rationality of the employer, that they were interested in productivity. Is there any other element that you see as important for this to happen, both happening at the same time?
There were many other conducive elements. So in one of the companies, it was linked to the COVID and the fact that work-life balance obviously gained in importance, also for the employer, who noticed that if they want to attract workforce, they need to be much more forward-looking in that domain. The fact that some workers could work remotely as the sort of inheritance of the pandemic, but that was only accessible to part of the white-collar workers, and production workers did not have access to remote work with its flexibility and benefits. That created some divisions that also the management saw the need to close because there was a tension between different parts of the workforce. No? So there were some of those small conditions that made it all possible to happen. But really, it was the demand of the employers to produce more that then workers said, okay, but on our terms and conditions. So there was this mutual dialogue.
Okay. I guess we can take some questions from the audience. Yes. Well, first, let me go with you because I know you had a question for Anke, right? So maybe we take 3 questions and then we give the floor back to our panelists.
Thank you very much. I'm Jenny Grunsman from the Swedish Confederation of Professional Associations. These are unions for people with a university diploma, such as doctors or lawyers or teachers or something. I would like to know, in Sweden, the discussion about working time reduction has been accompanied by, no, we can't do this because we need more staffing. What was the case in Germany with this? Because you talked especially about the health sector, I think, and social sector, because it has been kind of totally stop. We cannot do this. We have too few people. This will be unsustainable. Thank you.
We take 2 more. Yes, there and then Adriana.
Hi everyone, my name is Vic. I'm from the Belgian trade union ACV-CSC. I work for the white collar trade union, a part of ACV-CSC. In the banking and insurance industry. So that's me. But my question is, when you're thinking about negotiating in a collective labor time reduction, the option of either choosing more money or so an individual choice between more money, more wage, or less working time seems very attractive on a first stage. But then I guess I'm sure there should be some disadvantages as well, because if everybody can choose on an individual basis, if he or she wants more money or less working time, how do you, from a management point of view, prepare your labor or organization for such individual choices? And another thing is, yeah, if you have a lot of money, if you're like if you're a white collar employee with a high wage, it's easier to choose, of course, for less working time. But what about the people who don't earn a lot of money in the same company? So it's a very interesting example you gave us, because as a matter of fact, for the upcoming 2 years, we also in our Belgian trade union, in my sector, we have to make a choice if you want to go for like one option that is working time reduction for all, or we make the option, the strategic option, to give the choice to the employees themselves. Thank you very much for your feedback.
So, hello everybody. I had a question. You said that the 40 hours week does not longer fit for purpose. However, social protection systems in many countries, I'm thinking about France, have been built around these 40 hours per week work. And if we think about social justice and redistribution, my concern is that normally reduction in working hours may be accompanied by exception from social contributions on the part of employers. So they are going to give more money for less money for the social protection system. And I'm afraid of a transfer between those employees that work in big companies that have better conditions and the possibility to negotiate less working time, and those who are more vulnerable, whether in employment or not. I mean, that's my first concern. And the second, regarding the case you have studied in Italy, when you were talking about flexibility with shifts, are all employees the same when it comes to this flexibility, or is there? I mean, is those employers who have less room to choose and less possibility to choose the ones that are most affected by the flexibility? That's my two questions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, and last, Adrian is going to read a question from the people online.
Yeah, online you have a debate about gender also and the impact of gender, but one of the question is if employees choose to reduce their working hours instead of a pay rise, are they considered part-time workers or not?
Perfect. So we start with Anke. If you would like to respond some of the questions.
Yes, yeah, some huge range of questions and themes. First of all, I think there is many women normally they working part-time also in the hospital and so on. And if we done some working time reduction, they have more money than before in comparable to the hours. So the really new things of the collective bargaining in Germany was to say no, not only working time reduction is the aim, also to aim that we have enough staff. So in our it's very confusing perhaps for money, but we said okay, we negotiate with the hospital that we have enough. So, and we make some mathematical things that we have, okay, so many people we have in this kind of hospital or in this. And if they not have enough staff, then they can, nurse, for example, have a day off. But it's very complex mathematical things sometimes, and it's not that simple. But we have, I don't know really, but 18 or 19 collective bargaining on this. But because the nurse is saying, okay, we don't want to lose or we want to do our job. But yeah, no, that's why I said, okay, there are the both aims, not only the reduction of working, also, have enough staff. That was the new collective game.
Thank you, Anke. Margareta, do you want to make any additional remarks?
Perhaps I know. I have one more. I think
yes.
Because of social system, I think it depends if the working hours reduction is going with loss in wages. If there are no loss in wages, there is no dangers for the social system. So anyway, that's what I already will comment.
Thank you.
Yes, just for this question also, what's with the lack of staff question. In the hospital sector, we made a huge inquiry on the reasons why people leave there, the qualified care workers, and ask, under which conditions would you come back? And the interesting thing was, they answered almost when you make what Anke just now told, the level of staff on a higher range, the working time shorter, and for the most interesting point was the working time more predictable. Under these conditions, many of them would come back. Around 600,000 full-time jobs could be covered again when this condition would be fulfilled. Yeah? And so you have this connects between shorter and more predictable working times with the solution of the staff problem.
Thank you, Margareta. Agnieszka.
Thank you for the comments. I will start with the one about individual requests. So if the working time reduction is based on individuals choosing money or working time or individual requests to reduce hours, this is really, it's not creating anything collective or a new norm in any sense. It is still relying on a bargaining position or a better income position or some individuals being wealthier either because of their own income or household income, and that creates new divisions. So in the study, we also found some of the interesting pros and cons for both. In Italy, industrial sector is covered by national collective agreement that provides for individual working days to be taken as working time reduction, basically, that grants additional working days that can be requested individually by workers. So it's like granting additional holidays. And workers enjoy this right in the way that you would just take annual leave. It needs to be individually requested, and it means that employer doesn't implement any adjustment, any structural changes in the workplace. When working time reduction was negotiated, it used partly those individual days to kind of enmass them into the collective agreement, adding something on top. So it turned this individual right, which had zero effect on the organization of work in the company, into the structural reduction that then necessitated reorganization of the teams, of the way the work was performed. So then it can have much more powerful impact rather than having individuals requesting, because it doesn't produce the common different pattern of working. It's really just an individual right, which is akin to individual leave days. So there is a strong, I would say, argument in favor of not doing it on the individual based, on the individual basis, but rather on the collective one. The fact that, the social security that was already answered, if the income does not change, that shouldn't affect that. There is another risk of growing inequality within the workforce. If working time reduction is negotiated for full-time workers in better protected workplaces that have access to collective representation and not to all low-wage workers with insufficient hours who are underemployed, that creates the division that should be acknowledged. And the first answer is that working time reduction is not the solution, it's not the silver bullet. It shouldn't, the labor market policy shouldn't stop at this. It should go together with addressing non-standard work, low wages, and so on. The other question was flexibility for the shifts. Yeah, so working time reduction was kind of paid by increased flexibility and unpredictability of hours. So the more hours were cut, the more flexibility was in the shift system. We try to even picture it in a kind of a picture, really, because it was very complex pattern of working morning, evening, morning, then some days off. It was very complex, and even the feedback from workers on those very reduced hours was that they don't anymore know when they have weekend, because every week looked different. So there was a lot of this, the trade-off that it's also worth highlighting. Yeah, I think that's these are the issues.
Yeah, unfortunately, the time is over for this panel, but we will have more time during the break if you want to keep the discussion alive. Before we move to the break, Adrian, could we have the poll again to see how the perception of our audience has changed? So please, again, if you can take your phone and copy the QR. This time, we did include both as suggested by our panelists. So you have that option, but just we would really like you to answer as if you were on the shoes of a union leader that has constrained resources, constrained power, constrained time framework, and you have to decide based on what is the benefit of your constituents. We already heard some of the conditions that would enable both increasing wages and also work time reduction. So our panelists highlighted the element of increasing predictability of work, restructuring also the organization of work, of course, presenting the potential benefits on productivity, although Agnieszka also highlighted that this might be overestimated, but definitely making the case for working time reduction from the perspective of the employer can also be helpful to introduce both. So now it's on your side, taking all these elements into consideration, do you still think is a priority to go for wage increases, working time reduction, both, or still undecided? Well, let's show the results, Adrian, to see. Okay, let's see how it changed. Before, wage increases was 35%, and now it went to 19. Working time reduction was 47, and now it went down to 17. But of course, both is now receiving a big support of 60% of our audience. 3% still not convinced entirely, but I think this first panel fulfilled its purpose to go beyond this dilemma that sometimes can be a false dilemma and trying rather to analyze the conditions that would enable workers and unions to pursue both goals into their collective bargaining agreements. Well, thank you very much. And right now we'll have a short break. We'll see each other at 1:10. Is that correct? 2:10, sorry. Oh, just 2. So we only have 9 minutes. Enjoy your 9 minutes of break. Thank you very much.